In the summer of 1967, a group of 10 climbers set out to conquer Mount Denali, North America's highest peak. Instead, they were met with a terrifying storm that would become known as one of the deadliest climbing disasters in American history. Only 5 of the climbers survived, and their bodies were scattered across the mountain, frozen in time. The Mount Denali Disaster is a story of tragedy, bravery, and the unforgiving power of nature. Join us as we delve into the gruesome details of this unforgettable event. Joe Wilcox from Brigham Young University had planned the Denali expedition with the aim of providing an opportunity for college students to participate in a challenging climb. To attract climbers, Wilcox sent out newsletters and advertised a joining fee of $300 to cover food and gear expenses. He managed to recruit 8 men to join his expedition: Jerry Clark, age 31, Steve Taylor, age 22, Dennis Lusherhand, age 24, Mark McLaughlin, age 23, Angel Schiff, age 30, Hank James, age 25, John Russell, age 23, and Walt Taylor, age 24. The team of 8 set out to climb Denali, also known as Mount McKinley, which is the highest peak in North America with an elevation of 20,320 feet. The climb was scheduled for late June and early July of 1967. The group planned to take the popular West Buttress route, which was the most commonly climbed route on the mountain. The team arrived at the Gehletna Glacier Base Camp on June 24, 1967, and began to acclimate to the high altitude. They then established several camps along the route, including Camp 1 at 7,800 feet, Camp 2 at 10,000 feet, Camp 3 at 14,200 feet, and Camp 4 at 17,200 feet. In 1967, Mount Denali in Alaska was considered one of the most challenging peaks to climb in North America. It was also known for its treacherous weather conditions that could change suddenly and violently. However, the expedition's application to climb the mountain was met with skepticism from the National Park Service at Mount McKinley National Park due to the climbers' inexperience in high altitude. While all members of the team were familiar with basic mountaineering practices, none had ascended a peak higher than 15,000 feet, while Denali's summit is at 20,310 feet. As such, park rangers recommended that the Wilcox expedition merges with a more experienced climbing group from Colorado, led by Howard Snyder, who intended to climb the mountain at the same time. Snyder's group initially consisted of 4 men: Snyder, age 22, Jerry Lewis, age 31, Steve Lewis, and Paul Schlichter, age 22. The 4 intended to climb by themselves, but shortly before leaving for Alaska, Steve Lewis was injured in a traffic accident and was unable to climb. With his team now below the Park Service's mandated 4-person minimum, Snyder agreed to join Wilcox's expedition. The team was now a 12-member group attempting to climb the mountain. The Park Service approved the expedition's application to climb, but with caveats. Team members had to purchase and carry radios with them on the climb. The experienced climbers of the Colorado group had to stay with the less experienced climbers of Wilcox's group, and less experienced climbers had to take training courses to prepare for the high elevation and rugged terrain they would experience. On March 4, 1967, the team arrived at Denali's base camp and started their ascent of the mountain. They made steady progress, and by March 13th, they had established a high camp at 16,000 feet. However, the weather conditions worsened, and the team was forced to remain at the high camp for 6 days. On June 22nd, a team of climbers began their ascent of a mountain through the Carstens Ridge route across the Muldrow Glacier. This route is less expensive than the standard West Buttress route, but it is also more remote and much less used. Despite most of the team suffering from some level of altitude sickness, they made good progress up the mountain, and by July 13th, they had established a camp at 15,000 feet. At this point, some reports indicate that Park Service rangers contacted the team to inform them of a large storm developing that was projected to hit the mountain somewhere from July 16 to 17. However, Wilcox, one of the climbers, claimed that no advance notice of a potential storm was communicated to the team. Regardless of this potential discrepancy, the weather was projected to be clear for the next few days, and so the expedition continued on. The next day, 8 members of the team moved higher up the mountain to establish their final camp at 18,000 feet, with the intent of pushing for the summit on the 15th. The start of this climb was delayed when a malfunctioning stove caused one of the expedition's tents to catch fire. However, the high camp was established by 7 p.m. that evening. On July 15, 4 members of the team set out from the high camp for the summit at noon. These climbers included Wilcox, Snyder, Lewis, and Schlichter. The remaining members who had climbed the previous day remained at the high camp to rest, while the 4 members at the previous camp ascended to the high camp. Except for occasional stops to allow Lewis to rest, the team of 4 made good progress and reached the summit at roughly 6:30 p.m. Schlichter described near-perfect weather conditions at the summit with exceptional views, low wind, and temperatures at roughly 6 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the team encountered challenging weather conditions, including high winds and heavy snowfall, which slowed their progress. Despite these difficulties, the team successfully reached the summit on July 10, 1967, after spending 21 days on the mountain. On July 16, strong winds at 70 miles an hour buffeted the mountain, causing all 12 members to remain at the high camp. The next day, on July 17, 7 members of the team prepared to climb to the summit while the other 5 descended. Angel Schiff chose to descend due to the worsening effects of altitude sickness. The group that was climbing to the summit started later than expected, with an unknown start time after 2 p.m. Steve Taylor, who had also been suffering from altitude sickness, decided not to climb and remained at the high camp. At 8 p.m. that evening, a storm hit the upper slopes of the mountain, and Clark radioed rangers at the Yeltsin Visitor Center to inform them that the team was still on the upper slopes and unsure of their location due to dense fog. Clark reported that they had decided to bivouac and hoped for better weather in the morning. The next day, at 11:30 a.m. on July 18, Clark radioed the Visitor Center again, reporting that 5 climbers had reached the summit while Russell had not made it and was assumed to have turned back. Clark also reported that the weather was still poor, with high winds and whiteout conditions. He stated that the team intended to descend from the summit 5 to 10 minutes after the radio call and would contact the center again at 8 p.m. after returning to their high camp. After radio contact with the 7 climbers on the highest slopes of Denali ended, a severe storm hit the mountain, with wind speeds estimated to be between 100 to 150 miles an hour. Later, models created by the National Weather Service suggested that winds near the summit may have been even stronger, reaching almost 300 miles an hour. The 5 climbers who had descended to the camp at 15,000 feet became concerned about their missing teammates after 2 days of the storm and attempted to climb back to the high camp to look for them. However, they were forced to turn back due to poor weather conditions. A brief break in the weather allowed for a view up the mountain, but no signs of the missing climbers were visible, prompting an emergency call to the Park Service. The storm continued for 2 more days, during which the 5 men at 15,000 feet had to abandon one of their tents and all stay in one 3-person tent to keep warm. They were only able to eat foods that did not require cooking, and some became weak while others suffered from numbness in their extremities. Finally, on July 23rd, the weather conditions improved and the 5 men began descending to a lower camp at 12,100 feet. They received assistance and food from climbers representing the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, who had also weathered the storm at the lower elevation. The MCA members split up, with one climbing down with the survivors to ensure their safe return to the base camp, while the others began their ascent of the mountain to search for the missing 7 climbers still on the high slopes. The MCA climbers provided assistance and food to the exhausted and weakened group of 5. Lewis and Schiff were especially weak and needed immediate medical attention. Wilcox and Snyder were in relatively better shape, but they also suffered from numbness in their toes and fingers. The MCA climbers split up the next day, with one member accompanying the survivors down the mountain to ensure their safe return to base camp, while the remainder began their ascent of the mountain to search for the missing 7 still on the high slopes. The search for the missing climbers was a daunting task. The severe storm had covered the mountain with several feet of snow, and visibility was still limited due to the lingering snow and fog. The search party faced treacherous terrain and steep slopes as they climbed higher and higher up the mountain. Despite the challenging conditions, the search party remained committed to finding the missing climbers. They searched for several days, combing the high slopes and crevices for any sign of the 7 missing climbers. Finally, on July 28th, the search party made a grim discovery. They found the bodies of 4 of the missing climbers at the base of a steep slope. The bodies were badly injured and frozen, and it was clear that they had fallen a great distance. The search party continued to search for the remaining 3 climbers, but unfortunately, they were never found. Despite the difficult conditions, the search and rescue team remained determined to locate the missing climbers. On July 25th, 2 members of the team, Art Davidson and Dave Johnston, reached the high camp and discovered the bodies of 2 of the climbers, Jeff and Ruth, buried in a shallow snow grave. The discovery was devastating, but it provided the team with valuable information about the conditions the missing climbers had faced. The search continued, And on July 28, another group of climbers located the bodies of 5 more of the missing team members. The bodies were buried in the snow, and it was clear that they had not survived the storm. The search continued for the last missing member, but unfortunately, they were never found. The rescue of the remaining climbers from the Wilcox expedition was a race against time. With weather conditions deteriorating and the team stranded at 15,000 feet, it was imperative to get them off the mountain as soon as possible. On July 25th, the 5 survivors finally reached base camp, but their ordeal was far from over. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Wilcox crossed Wonder Lake to reach the Wonder Lake Ranger Station, which immediately dispatched a helicopter to rescue the remaining climbers. Despite the challenging terrain and weather conditions, the helicopter was able to land at the base camp and evacuate the remaining survivors. The team was then taken to a hospital in Anchorage for medical treatment and to recover from their traumatic experience. Meanwhile, the search for the missing climbers continued. On July 28, members of the MCA finally reached the remnants of the Wilcox Expedition's high camp. There, they found the remains of one of the climbers, likely frozen to death in a clutching position with a tent pole. This grim discovery suggested that the situation was even worse than anticipated. The next day, the search party ascended higher up the mountain and discovered the bodies of 2 more climbers at the base of Archdeacon's Tower. The bodies were in a sitting position, bracing themselves against the wind. It wasn't until 1968 that a humanitarian expedition climbed the mountain to find and bury all 7 bodies. However, by that point, the remains that were found the previous year had disappeared, and none of the climbers' remains were ever recovered. Tragically, during the descent, a storm hit the mountain, and the team was forced to dig snow caves for shelter. 7 team members died in the storm, including Wilcox, Clark, Schiff, Janes, Russell, McLennan, and Lutcherhand. Only 2 members of the team, Steve Taylor and Walt Taylor, survived the storm and were rescued 5 days later by a search and rescue team. Joe Wilcox, the leader of the ill-fated expedition, faced intense criticism for his leadership and lack of experience in high-altitude settings. He initially accepted responsibility for the accident, but later studies by the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration showed that the storm conditions in the upper slopes of the mountain were not survivable by any person, thus absolving Wilcox. Howard Snyder and Paul Schlitter, 2 survivors of the tragedy, later concluded that the group that perished was at fault for failing to make use of several days of good weather to push for the summit and continue to ascend despite the onset of bad weather. In the years following the disaster, several books were written about the climb, detailing different perspectives on the tragedy. Snyder and Wilcox both wrote personal accounts of the events, while other authors provided broader historical and investigative perspectives. James M. Tabor's book, Forever on the Mountain, won the National Outdoor Book Award in 2008, and Jeffrey Beckock's Should I Not Return provided a first-hand account of the search for the missing climbers. Andy Hall's Denali's Howl, published in 2014, includes interviews with both Wilcox and Snyder about the disaster and its lasting impact on their lives. The tragedy of the Mount Denali remains a cautionary tale for mountaineers and serves as a reminder of the dangers of high-altitude climbing. The lessons learned from this disaster have helped to improve safety protocols and decision-making in mountaineering, and the legacy of those who lost their lives on the mountain continues to be remembered and honored. We hope you've liked our explanation of the horrific incident. Hit the like button and share your opinions in the comments box. Press the subscribe button for more related content and click the bell icon for regular updates. Thanks for watching.